Sarah Mitchell had always been different from other girls her age. While her friends spent their evenings watching movies or gossiping about boys, she was studying military tactics and physical training routines. At 22, she stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, but her determination towered over everyone around her. Growing up in a small Texas town, Sarah watched her father struggle with nightmares from his service in Vietnam. She saw how the war had changed him, how he would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, reliving battles that happened decades ago. Her mother would hold him close, whispering that he was safe now that he was home, but Sarah could see the pain in his eyes that never really went away. When Sarah turned 18, she made a decision that shocked everyone in her family. She wanted to join the Marines. Not the Army like her father, not the Navy like her uncle, but the Marines, the toughest branch of the military. Her parents tried to talk her out of it. They reminded her that she was small, that military life was hard, that she could get hurt or worse. But Sarah had made up her mind. She had spent years preparing for this moment. Every morning before school, she would run 5 miles through the countryside. After school, she would lift weights in her garage, do push-ups until her arms shook, and practice combat moves she learned from YouTube videos. Her determination was unshakable. The day she left for boot camp at Parris Island, South Carolina, her father drove her to the airport. He didn't say much during the 3-hour drive, but when they reached the terminal, he grabbed her hand tightly. His eyes were wet with tears he was trying not to shed. "Promise me you'll be careful out there," he whispered. "I promise, Dad, and I promise I'll make you proud." Boot camp was everything Sarah had expected and worse. The drill instructors screamed at her from dawn until dusk. They made her crawl through mud, climb over walls twice her height, and carry equipment that weighed almost as much as she did. Many nights she fell into her bunk so exhausted she couldn't even change out of her dirty uniform. Some of the other recruits made fun of her size. They called her tiny and short stack. During group exercises, they would roll their eyes when she was assigned to their team, thinking she would slow them down. But Sarah proved them wrong again and again. What she lacked in size, she made up for in speed, intelligence, and an iron will that refused to give up. 3 months later, Sarah graduated from boot camp. She had lost 15 pounds and gained muscle she never knew she had. More importantly, she had earned the respect of her fellow Marines and her drill instructors. The scared girl from Texas was gone, replaced by a confident Marine ready to serve her country. After completing her advanced training, Sarah was assigned to a base in Afghanistan. The country was still dangerous, even though the major fighting had ended years before. Her unit was responsible for training Afghan soldiers and protecting American civilians who were working to rebuild the country's infrastructure. Sarah loved her job. She was good at working with the Afghan soldiers, many of whom were suspicious of Americans at first. Her small size actually helped her here. She seemed less threatening than the big muscular Marines who had trained them before. She learned basic phrases in their language and always treated them with respect. Slowly, they began to trust her. The base where Sarah was stationed sat in a valley surrounded by mountains. It housed about 300 American personnel, including soldiers, Marines, civilians, and contractors. The base had everything they needed: sleeping quarters, a dining hall, a medical clinic, a gym, and even a small recreation center where they could watch movies and play video games during their free time. Sarah shared a room with another female Marine named Jessica, who had become her best friend. Jessica was from California and was the complete opposite of Sarah in many ways. She was tall, blonde, and had joined the Marines because her boyfriend had dared her to. But despite their differences, the two women had formed a strong bond. Every morning, Sarah would wake up before dawn and go for a run around the base. The mountain air was thin and cold, making her lungs burn, but she pushed through the discomfort. After her run, she would shower, eat breakfast, and report for duty. Her days were filled with training exercises, patrol duties, and administrative work. The local village was about 2 miles from the base. Sarah and her unit would often visit to check on the villagers and make sure they felt safe. The children would run up to them, begging for candy or small toys. Sarah always kept a few pieces of gum or small trinkets in her pockets for them. One little girl named Amira had become especially attached to Sarah. She was about 8 years old, with big brown eyes and a shy smile. Amira would always find Sarah when the Marines visited the village, holding her hand and chattering away in broken English about her family, her goats, and her dreams of becoming a teacher someday. Sarah had been in Afghanistan for 8 months when everything changed. It was a Tuesday morning in March and the weather was unusually warm. Sarah was in the communications room, updating reports on their latest training session with the Afghan soldiers, when alarms started blaring throughout the base. At first, she thought it was just another drill. They had emergency drills at least twice a week to keep everyone prepared. But then she heard the distinctive whistle of incoming artillery, followed by the thunderous crash of an explosion that shook the entire building. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She dropped to the floor, covered her head with her hands, and waited for the all-clear signal. But instead of stopping, the explosions continued. Dust and debris fell from the ceiling as the building shook with each impact. Through the communications equipment, she could hear panicked voices reporting casualties and requesting immediate medical assistance. Sarah realized this wasn't a drill, they were under attack. Her heart pounded as she grabbed her rifle and prepared to defend her base and her fellow Marines. The attack came from 3 different directions at once. Sarah could hear the distinct sounds of rocket-propelled grenades and automatic weapons fire, mixing with the chaos of Marines shouting orders and civilians screaming for help. Smoke began filling the communications room as fires broke out across the base. Sarah's commander's voice crackled through her radio, barely audible over the noise. All personnel to defensive positions. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. We have multiple casualties and need immediate medical assistance at the main barracks. She grabbed her medical kit along with her rifle. Sarah had completed advanced first aid training, and she knew that in situations like this, every Marine needed to be ready to save lives as well as fight. The communications room was on the 2nd floor of the administrative building, and she needed to get to ground level to help with the casualties. As Sarah ran down the hallway, another explosion rocked the building. The lights went out, and she found herself running in complete darkness. She used her hands to feel along the walls, moving as quickly as she dared. Behind her, she could hear the sound of the ceiling collapsing in the room she had just left. When she reached the stairwell, Sarah could see flames coming from the 1st floor. The smoke was so thick she could barely breathe. She pulled her shirt up over her nose and mouth and continued down the stairs. Each step felt like it might be her last as the building groaned and creaked around her. The main door was blocked by debris, so Sarah had to find another way out. She remembered there was a window in the supply room that faced the back of the building. She felt her way through the smoke-filled hallway, her eyes streaming with tears from the acrid air. The window was small, but Sarah was small too. She used the butt of her rifle to break the glass, then carefully climbed through, cutting her arms on the remaining shards. As soon as she was outside, she could see the full extent of the attack. The main barracks building had taken a direct hit from what looked like a rocket. Half of the roof had collapsed, and flames were shooting out of several windows. Sarah could hear people screaming for help from inside the burning building. Without hesitation, she ran toward the sound. The front entrance to the barracks was completely blocked by concrete and steel beams. Sarah ran around to the side of the building, looking for another way in. She found a window that was broken but still accessible. The opening was barely large enough for her to squeeze through, but she managed to get inside. The scene inside the barracks was horrific. Smoke filled the air so thickly that Sarah could only see a few feet in front of her. The floor was covered with debris, broken glass, and worse things she tried not to think about. She called out, trying to locate any survivors. "Help! Someone help me!" The voice was coming from her left, somewhere under a pile of concrete blocks and twisted metal. Sarah followed the sound and found a young Marine named David Chen, trapped beneath a fallen beam. He was conscious but clearly in tremendous pain. "I can't feel my legs," David gasped. "Sarah, is that you?" "I can't feel my legs at all." Sarah had known David for months. He was only 19 years old and had joined the Marines straight out of high school. He was always joking around, trying to make everyone laugh even during the most difficult training exercises. Now he was trapped and possibly paralyzed, and Sarah was his only hope. The beam across David's lower body was massive, easily 3 times Sarah's weight. Under normal circumstances, there would be no way she could move it by herself. But these weren't normal circumstances, and Sarah wasn't thinking about what was impossible. She found a piece of rebar in the debris and used it as a lever. Positioning it under the beam, she put all of her weight into lifting it. The beam moved slightly, but not enough to free David. Sarah tried again, this time letting out a yell that seemed to give her extra strength. The beam shifted another few inches. "That's it, Sarah. Keep going." David encouraged her, even though his face was pale and covered with sweat from the pain. Sarah repositioned the rebar and tried a third time. This time, the beam lifted enough for David to start pulling himself out from underneath it. But he was badly injured and couldn't move very fast. Sarah had to hold the beam up while he slowly dragged himself to safety. Her arms were shaking with the effort and she could feel her strength giving out. Just when she thought she couldn't hold it any longer, David cleared the beam and Sarah let it crash back down to the floor. But their problems were far from over. David couldn't walk and the building was filling with smoke and flames. Sarah could hear more explosions outside, which meant the attack was still ongoing. She needed to get David out of the building and to the medical station, but he weighed almost twice as much as she did. "Leave me here," David said weakly. "You need to get out before this whole place comes down. Save yourself." Sarah looked at him with determination burning in her eyes. "I'm not leaving anyone behind. That's not what Marines do." She helped David sit up and then positioned herself so she could lift him onto her back. It was the most difficult thing she had ever attempted in her life. David's dead weight seemed to increase with every step as Sarah slowly made her way toward the window she had entered through. The smoke was getting thicker, and Sarah was having trouble breathing. Her legs felt like they were going to collapse under David's weight, but she kept moving forward. She thought about her father, about her promise to make him proud, about all the reasons she had become a Marine in the first place. Halfway to the window, Sarah stumbled and almost fell. David groaned in pain as she struggled to regain her balance. She could feel her strength ebbing away, but she refused to give up. Step by agonizing step, she carried him toward safety. When they finally reached the window, Sarah realized she faced another seemingly impossible challenge. How was she going to get David through the small opening while carrying him on her back? She would have to find a way to lift him up and push him through first, then follow after him. Sarah positioned David near the window and then climbed through herself. From outside, she reached back in and grabbed his arms, pulling with everything she had left. David helped as much as he could, using his arms to push against the window frame. It seemed to take forever, but finally David was outside, and they were both clear of the burning building. Sarah collapsed next to him, gasping for air and shaking from exhaustion, but they weren't safe yet. The attack was still happening all around them, and they needed to get to the medical station. Sarah knew she had to keep moving. The medical station was on the other side of the base, at least 200 yards away across open ground. Between them and safety, explosions continued to light up the morning sky, and she could hear the sharp crack of sniper fire from the surrounding mountains. David was fading in and out of consciousness. His breathing was shallow, and Sarah could see that he was losing blood from injuries she couldn't fully assess in the chaos. Every second counted if he was going to survive. "Stay with me, David," she whispered, checking his pulse. It was weak but steady. "I'm going to get you to Doc Martinez." "You're going to be fine." Sarah looked around for something she could use to transport David more easily. About 30 feet away, she spotted an overturned wheelbarrow near the motor pool. It wasn't ideal, but it would be better than trying to carry him the entire distance. Staying low to avoid the random gunfire, Sarah sprinted to the wheelbarrow. A bullet struck the ground just inches from her feet, spraying dirt into her face. She grabbed the wheelbarrow and ran back to David, zigzagging to make herself a harder target. Getting David into the wheelbarrow was another challenge. He was barely conscious and couldn't help much. Sarah had to lift his torso while supporting his injured legs, trying to be as gentle as possible while also moving quickly. David cried out in pain as she moved him, but she had no choice. Once David was positioned in the wheelbarrow, Sarah began the dangerous journey across the base. She pushed as fast as she could while trying to avoid the largest pieces of debris. The wheelbarrow's wheel kept hitting rocks and chunks of concrete, jolting David and making him groan. Halfway to the medical station, Sarah heard a sound that made her blood run cold, the distinctive whistle of an incoming mortar round. She had only seconds to react. Without thinking, she threw herself on top of David just as the explosion erupted 20 feet away. The blast knocked Sarah unconscious for several minutes. When she came to, her ears were ringing and she couldn't hear anything else. Blood was trickling down her forehead from where a piece of shrapnel had grazed her scalp. The wheelbarrow had been overturned by the blast, and David was lying motionless on the ground beside it. For a terrifying moment, Sarah thought David was dead. But when she checked his pulse, it was still there, though weaker than before. The explosion had reopened some of his wounds and he was bleeding more heavily now. Sarah knew she was running out of time. She couldn't get David back into the damaged wheelbarrow, so she had to go back to carrying him. Her body was screaming in protest. Every muscle ached. Her head was pounding from the concussion and she could barely see straight. But David's life depended on her, and that was all that mattered. Sarah positioned David on her back once again and continued toward the medical station. Each step was agony, but she forced herself to keep moving. She thought about David's family back home, about the letters he had shown her from his little sister who looked up to him so much. The medical station was actually just a reinforced bunker that served as both a treatment facility and a safe room during attacks. As Sarah approached, she could see other Marines bringing in wounded soldiers. The small facility was overwhelmed with casualties, but at least it was still functioning. Dr. Martinez saw Sarah coming and immediately called for help. 2 Marines ran over and carefully took David from her back, carrying him into the bunker on a stretcher. Sarah tried to follow them inside, but her legs finally gave out and she collapsed on the ground outside the entrance. Sarah, can you hear me?" Dr. Martinez was kneeling beside her, checking her pupils with a small flashlight. His voice sounded like it was coming from the end of a long tunnel. "You've got a concussion and you're showing signs of exhaustion and dehydration. We need to get you inside." Sarah tried to sit up, but the world spun around her. "David? Is David going to be okay? We're working on him now. You got him here just in time. A few more minutes and we might have lost him." Dr. Martinez helped Sarah to her feet and guided her into the bunker. "You saved his life, Sarah. What you did out there was incredible." Inside the medical station, Sarah could see the full scope of the attack's damage. There were Marines lying on stretchers everywhere, some with injuries far worse than David's. The medical staff was working frantically to save as many lives as possible. Sarah was given a cot in the corner, where she could rest while Dr. Martinez treated her head, wound, and checked for other injuries. She had cuts and bruises all over her body. Her hands were scraped raw from lifting debris, and she had inhaled so much smoke that her lungs burned with every breath. But she was alive, and more importantly, so was David. As the hours passed, the sounds of battle gradually died away. The attack had been repelled, though at a heavy cost. 12 American soldiers had been killed and more than 30 others had been wounded. The base's infrastructure was heavily damaged, with several buildings completely destroyed. Late that afternoon, Sarah's commanding officer, Colonel Williams, came to check on her. He was a tough, no-nonsense Marine who had served 3 tours of duty and had seen everything the military had to offer. But when he looked at Sarah, there was something different in his eyes, a mixture of respect and amazement. "Marine Mitchell," he said, pulling up a chair beside her cot. "I've been hearing quite a story about what you did today. I'm told you single-handedly rescued Private Chen from a burning building and carried him to safety while under enemy fire." Sarah tried to sit up straighter, but Colonel Williams gestured for her to stay comfortable. "I just did what anyone would have done, sir. David needed help." Colonel Williams shook his head. "No, Sarah, what you did was extraordinary. Private Chen weighs 170 pounds. You weigh what, 120? You carried him more than 200 yards through an active combat zone. The doctors say if you had been 5 minutes later, he would have died from blood loss." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "How is he doing now, sir?" "He's stable. He's got 2 broken legs and some internal injuries, but he's going to recover. He'll probably be medically discharged and sent home, but he'll walk again. That's thanks to you." Colonel Williams stood up and placed his hand on Sarah's shoulder. "I'm recommending you for a commendation, Marine. What you did today represents the very best of what it means to be a Marine. You put your fellow soldier's life above your own safety, and you never gave up even when the situation seemed impossible." As Colonel Williams left, Sarah finally allowed herself to cry. The adrenaline that had kept her going during the attack was wearing off, and the full weight of what had happened was beginning to sink in. She had nearly died today, and so had David and many others, but they had survived, and that was what mattered. 3 days after the attack, Sarah was finally cleared to return to light duty. Her concussion had healed enough that she could function normally, though she still had headaches and occasional dizzy spells. The cuts and bruises covering her body were starting to fade, but the memories of that terrifying morning remained vivid. The base looked completely different now. Where the main barracks had stood, there was only a pile of rubble and twisted metal. Work crews were busy clearing debris and beginning reconstruction, but it would be months before everything was back to normal. Many of the Marines who had served alongside Sarah were gone. Some had been killed, others wounded badly enough to be sent home. David Chen was one of those being evacuated. Sarah visited him in the medical station before he was airlifted to Germany for advanced treatment. He was awake and alert, though still in considerable pain from his injuries. "Sarah," he said when he saw her approaching his stretcher, "I heard what you did. The other guys told me you carried me all the way to the medical station." Sarah pulled up a chair beside him. "I couldn't leave you there, David. We look out for each other. That's what we do." David's eyes filled with tears. "The doctors say I'm going to walk again, but my Marine Corps career is over. I'm getting a medical discharge." He paused, struggling with his emotions. "I want you to know that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of what you did for me. You gave me a second chance, and I'm not going to waste it." Sarah squeezed his hand gently. "You don't owe me anything, David. Just live a good life and be happy. That's all any of us can ask for." After David was evacuated, Sarah threw herself back into her duties with even more dedication than before. Word of her heroic actions had spread throughout the base and beyond. Marines who had never spoken to her before would nod respectfully when they passed her in the hallways. Her fellow soldiers looked at her differently now, not as the small woman who had to prove herself, but as a genuine hero who had already proven everything that needed proving. But Sarah didn't feel like a hero. She felt like she had simply done her job. When she thought about that morning, what stood out to her wasn't her own courage, but the courage of all the Marines who had fought to defend the base. She had saved one life, but many others had died fighting to save everyone. 2 weeks after the attack, Sarah received unexpected news. She was being temporarily reassigned to the main Marine base in Kabul, Afghanistan's capital city. Colonel Williams called her into his office to explain. "The Marine Corps wants to recognize what you did officially," he told her. "There's going to be a ceremony in Kabul, and some very important people want to meet you. This isn't optional, Sarah. You're going whether you want to or not." Sarah felt uncomfortable with the attention. "Sir, I really don't think what I did was that special." "Any Marine would have done the same thing." Colonel Williams smiled. "That's exactly why you deserve this recognition, Sarah. You don't think you did anything special, but everyone else knows better. Sometimes we need heroes to remind us what we're fighting for and what we're capable of when we refuse to give up." The trip to Kabul took most of a day, traveling in an armored convoy through dangerous mountain passes. Sarah had never been to Afghanistan's capital before, and she was surprised by how large and busy it was. Even after years of war, the city was full of life and energy. The main Marine base in Kabul was enormous compared to Sarah's small outpost. It housed thousands of American personnel and was like a small city unto itself. Sarah was assigned quarters in the visiting officers section, which felt strange since she was still just a regular Marine, not an officer. The ceremony was scheduled for the following morning, but Sarah still didn't know exactly what to expect. She had been told to report to the parade ground at 800 hours in her dress uniform, but nobody had explained what would happen after that. That evening, Sarah called her parents from the communications center. It was the first time she had been able to speak with them since the attack, and she knew they must be worried sick. She had been allowed to send them a brief message saying she was safe, but nothing more. "Sarah?" "Oh my God, Sarah, is that really you?" Her mother's voice was full of relief and tears. "We heard about the attack on the news, but they wouldn't tell us anything specific. We've been so worried." "I'm okay, Mom, I'm fine. I was hurt a little bit, but nothing serious." Her father got on the phone. "Sarah, we heard rumors about what you did. Something about you saving another soldier's life. Is that true?" Sarah didn't know how to answer. She didn't want to worry her parents more than they already were, but she also didn't want to lie to them. "I helped get someone to the medical station during the attack. It wasn't a big deal." "Not a big deal," her mother said. "Sarah, we got a call from your commanding officer yesterday. He said you're getting some kind of medal for heroism. He said you risked your life to save someone else." "Mom, I just did what anyone would do. I couldn't leave David there to die." Her father's voice was thick with emotion when he spoke again. "Sarah, I want you to know how proud I am of you. When I served in Vietnam, I saw a lot of brave men do incredible things. What you did, it takes a special kind of person to put someone else's life before their own. You've always been special, but now the whole world is going to know it. After the phone call, Sarah walked around the base, trying to process everything that had happened over the past few weeks. She thought about her childhood, about her decision to join the Marines, about all the challenges she had faced and overcome. She never could have imagined that it would lead to this moment. The next morning, Sarah put on her dress uniform and reported to the parade ground as ordered. When she arrived, she was shocked to see hundreds of Marines already formed up in perfect ranks standing at attention. She had expected a small ceremony with maybe a dozen people, not this massive gathering. Colonel Williams met her at the entrance to the parade ground. "Sarah, I need to prepare you for what's about to happen. There are some very important people here today, including some generals and even some folks from Washington. This is a bigger deal than you realize." As Sarah walked onto the parade ground, she saw a platform set up at one end with several high-ranking officers and civilians. There were photographers and TV cameras pointed in her direction. The entire scene felt surreal, like she was watching someone else's life rather than living her own. But the most amazing thing was the Marines themselves. 700 of them, all standing perfectly straight, all looking directly at her with expressions of respect and admiration. These were battle-hardened soldiers who had seen combat, who had faced danger and death, and they were all there to honor what she had done. Sarah realized that this moment would change her life forever. She was no longer just Sarah Mitchell from a small town in Texas. She was about to become a symbol of something larger than herself, a reminder of the courage and sacrifice that defined the Marine Corps and the American military. As Sarah walked across the parade ground toward the platform, the silence was absolute. 700 Marines stood motionless, their eyes following her every step. The only sounds were her boots on the concrete and the distant noise of helicopters somewhere beyond the base perimeter. Sarah had never felt smaller or more overwhelmed in her life. Each step felt like it took forever, and she was acutely aware of everyone watching her. She tried to walk with confidence the way she had been trained, but inside she was terrified. This kind of attention was the opposite of everything she had expected when she joined the Marines. When she reached the platform, a general she didn't recognize stepped forward. He was a tall man with gray hair and more medals on his chest than Sarah had ever seen on one person. His presence commanded immediate respect, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the entire parade ground without amplification. "Marines," the general announced, "we are gathered here today to honor one of our own. Private First Class Sarah Mitchell represents everything we value about the Marine Corps: courage, loyalty, and an unwavering commitment to never leave a fellow Marine behind." The general turned to face Sarah directly. "Private Mitchell, on the morning of March 15th, you were faced with an impossible choice. You could have evacuated to safety when your base came under attack, as many others did. Instead, you chose to enter a burning building to save the life of Private David Chen, who was trapped and helpless." Sarah's hands were trembling, but she kept them steady at her sides. She focused on the general's words, trying to absorb what was happening. What followed was an act of heroism that will be remembered long after all of us are gone. The general continued, "Despite being significantly smaller than the man you were trying to save, despite being under enemy fire, despite suffering from smoke inhalation and a concussion, you carried Private Chen more than 200 yards to safety. Your actions directly saved his life." The general picked up a small blue box from the table behind him. "Private Mitchell, it is my honor to present you with the Navy Cross, the second highest military decoration for valor in combat. This medal has been awarded to fewer than 500 women in the entire history of the United States military. You have earned your place among the bravest Americans who have ever served their country." Sarah felt her knees weaken as the significance of what was happening hit her. The Navy Cross wasn't just any medal. It was awarded only for extraordinary heroism in combat. She thought about all the Marines who had earned this decoration over the decades, many of them receiving it posthumously. She was being placed among the most elite group of American military heroes. As the general pinned the medal to her uniform, Sarah caught sight of movement in the crowd of observers near the platform. Her heart nearly stopped when she recognized two familiar faces. Her parents had flown all the way to Afghanistan to be there for this moment. Her father was in his old army dress uniform, standing as straight and proud as he had probably stood 40 years earlier. Her mother was crying openly, not caring who saw her tears. When Sarah's eyes met theirs, her father gave her the slightest nod of approval, and she had to fight to keep her own tears from falling. After the medal was pinned to her uniform, the general stepped back and saluted Sarah. Then something incredible happened. Every single Marine on that parade ground, all 700 of them, raised their hands in salute simultaneously. The sight was breathtaking and overwhelming. These were her peers, her brothers and sisters in arms, all acknowledging her bravery in the most respectful way possible. Sarah returned the salute, trying to encompass all 700 Marines in the gesture. The moment seemed to last forever, burned into her memory with perfect clarity. She would remember every detail of this scene for the rest of her life. The feeling of the desert sun on her face, the sound of helicopters in the distance, the sight of all those Marines honoring what she had done. After the ceremony, Sarah was overwhelmed by people wanting to meet her and congratulate her. Generals, colonels, and other high-ranking officers shook her hand and told her how proud they were to serve alongside her. News reporters asked her questions about the attack and how she found the strength to carry David to safety. But the most important moment came when she was finally able to reach her parents. Her mother grabbed her in a hug so tight Sarah could barely breathe, sobbing with relief and pride. Her father waited his turn, then held her close and whispered in her ear. "I knew from the day you were born that you were special," he said, "but I never imagined you would become this kind of special. I am so proud to be your father, and I am so proud to be able to tell people that my daughter is an American hero." That evening, there was a formal dinner in Sarah's honor. She sat at the head table with the commanding generals and other dignitaries, still hardly believing that any of this was real. During the dinner, she learned more about the impact of her story. "Your actions have been reported all over the world," one general told her. "Young people are reading about what you did and deciding to join the military because they want to serve alongside Marines like you. You've become a symbol of what American service members are capable of," another officer added. "We've received calls from military recruiters all across the country. They say more young women are expressing interest in joining the Marines than they've seen in years. You're inspiring a whole new generation of service members." Sarah found this both humbling and terrifying. She had never intended to become a symbol or an inspiration. She had simply done what she thought was right in an impossible situation. The idea that her actions were influencing other people's life decisions was a responsibility she hadn't expected. Later that night, alone in her quarters, Sarah called David Chen in the military hospital in Germany where he was still recovering. When he answered the phone, his voice was weak but excited. "Sarah, I heard about the ceremony today. The Navy Cross, can you believe it? They gave you the Navy Cross." "I can barely believe any of it, David. How are you feeling? Are you getting better?" "The doctors say I'll be able to walk without assistance within a few months. I'm going to have a slight limp for the rest of my life, but I'll be fine." "Sarah, I watched the ceremony online, seeing all those Marines saluting you. I've never been so proud to know someone in my entire life." David paused, and Sarah could hear him struggling with his emotions. "I want you to know that what happened to me, getting wounded, being forced to leave the Marines, none of that matters compared to being alive. I'm going to get married next year to my girlfriend from high school. I'm going to have kids someday. I'm going to live a full life, and it's all because you refused to leave me behind." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. "You don't need to thank me, David. I would do it again in a heartbeat. I know you would. That's what makes you special. That's why you deserved that medal today." After hanging up with David, Sarah sat on her bunk and looked at the Navy Cross in its presentation box. The medal was beautiful, a bronze cross with an eagle and anchor in the center, suspended from a blue ribbon with white stripes. But more than its appearance, what struck her was what it represented. This medal connected her to every Marine who had ever shown extraordinary courage in combat. It linked her to heroes from World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and every conflict where Marines had served. She was now part of a brotherhood and sisterhood that transcended time and circumstance. The next morning, Sarah received orders that would change her life once again. She was being reassigned to the United States for a series of speaking engagements and recruiting events. The Marine Corps wanted her to share her story with civilians and potential recruits across the country. "This is an important assignment, Sarah," Colonel Williams explained during their final meeting. "You represent something that the American people need to see right now. You show them that heroism isn't about being the biggest or the strongest or the most experienced. Sometimes heroism is about refusing to give up when everything seems impossible." Sarah felt nervous about the prospect of speaking publicly. She had never been comfortable being the center of attention, And now she was expected to stand in front of large audiences and talk about the most terrifying experience of her life. What if I say the wrong thing, sir? What if I don't represent the Marine Corps the way I should? Colonel Williams smiled. Sarah, you've already represented the Marine Corps better than most people ever could. Just be yourself, tell your story honestly, and let people see who you really are. That's all you need to do. Before leaving Afghanistan, Sarah made one last trip to the village near her original base. She wanted to say goodbye to the people she had come to know during her deployment, especially little Amira, the 8-year-old girl who had always been so excited to see her. The village had been affected by the attack on the base as well. Several buildings had been damaged by stray artillery fire, and many families had been forced to evacuate temporarily. But the villagers had returned and were rebuilding, just as the Marines were doing. Amira listened intently, then said something that made the interpreter smile. She says she will remember you always, and when she becomes a teacher like she wants to be, she will tell her students about the brave American Marine who showed her that being small doesn't mean you can't do big things. As Sarah prepared to leave the village for the last time, she realized that her story wasn't just about one day of heroism during an attack. It was about all the connections she had made, all the lives she had touched, and all the people who had touched her life in return. David Chen, little Amira, her fellow Marines, her parents. They were all part of the story that had led to that moment on the parade ground when 700 Marines saluted her bravery. The helicopter ride back to Kabul gave Sarah time to reflect on everything that had happened since she had first decided to join the Marines. She thought about the scared young woman who had left Texas 3 years earlier, determined to prove herself but not sure how. That woman seemed like a different person now. Sarah had learned that real strength wasn't about being the biggest or the toughest. It was about refusing to quit when quitting would be easier. It was about putting other people's needs ahead of your own safety. It was about believing that every life has value and that no one should be left behind. As the helicopter flew over the mountains of Afghanistan, Sarah knew that her military career was entering a new phase. She would continue to serve her country, but in a different way. She would be an example and an inspiration to others, showing them what was possible when ordinary people found extraordinary courage within themselves. 6 months after receiving the Navy Cross, Sarah found herself standing backstage at a high school in her hometown in Texas. She could hear the excited chatter of hundreds of teenagers on the other side of the curtain, waiting to hear from the local girl who had become a national hero. This was her 15th speaking engagement since returning to the United States, but she still felt nervous before each one. The principal of the school, Mrs. Henderson, had been Sarah's English teacher when she was a student there just 5 years earlier. Now she was introducing Sarah to an auditorium full of young people who saw her as proof that extraordinary things could come from ordinary places. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Henderson announced, "please welcome home our very own hero, Navy Cross recipient, Marine Corporal Sarah Mitchell." Sarah walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. She looked out at the audience and was amazed to see not just students but parents, teachers, and community members who had come to hear her speak. In the front row, she spotted her own parents beaming with pride. "Thank you all for that warm welcome," Sarah began, her voice strong and clear despite her nervousness. 5 years ago, I sat in those same seats wondering what I was going to do with my life. I was scared about the future, uncertain about my abilities, and had no idea that I was capable of doing anything special. Sarah had learned to structure her speeches around 3 main points: that heroism comes from ordinary people, that we never know what we're capable of until we're tested, and that we all have a responsibility to help others when they need us most. "I want to tell you about a young man named David Chen," she continued. "David was 19 years old when I met him in Afghanistan. He was funny, kind, and always trying to make everyone around him laugh. On March 15th, David was trapped under debris in a burning building, and his life depended on someone being willing to help him." Sarah went on to describe the attack and her decision to enter the burning building. She was careful not to make herself sound like a superhero, but rather like an ordinary person who found herself in an extraordinary situation. "I'm not particularly strong, and I'm definitely not particularly big," she said with a smile that drew laughter from the audience. "David weighs 50 pounds more than I do. Under normal circumstances, there's no way I could have carried him 200 yards. But these weren't normal circumstances, and I wasn't thinking about what was impossible. I was only thinking about getting my friend to safety. A student in the audience raised her hand. Were you scared? Sarah nodded. I was terrified. I was scared of the fire, scared of the explosions going off around us, scared that I wouldn't be strong enough to help David. But being scared doesn't mean you can't do what needs to be done. Sometimes being brave means doing the right thing even when you're afraid. Another student asked, how did you find the strength to carry him so far? I think strength comes from different places at different times, Sarah replied. That day, my strength came from refusing to accept that David was going to die. I thought about his family back home, about his dreams for the future, about the fact that he was someone's son and brother and friend. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try everything possible to save him. After her formal presentation, Sarah spent an hour answering questions and talking with individual students. Many of them were considering military service, inspired by her story. Others just wanted to meet someone who had shown such extraordinary courage. One young girl, probably 15 years old, approached Sarah shyly. Ms. Mitchell, I'm really small too, and people always tell me I can't do things because of my size. How do you deal with that? Sarah knelt down to the girl's level, just as she had done with Amira in Afghanistan. What's your name? Emma. Emma, I want you to remember something. Your size is just one small part of who you are. What matters is the size of your heart, the strength of your determination, and your willingness to help others. Some of the most powerful people in history have been physically small. Don't let anyone convince you that you can't do something just because you're not tall or big. Emma's eyes lit up. Really? You think I could be a Marine too? I think you can be anything you set your mind to being. The question isn't whether you're big enough or strong enough. The question is whether you're determined enough and caring enough. Later that evening, Sarah had dinner with her parents at their favorite local restaurant. It felt strange being back in the small town where she had grown up, now that she had seen so much of the world and experienced things she never could have imagined. I'm so proud of what you've become, her mother said over dessert, not just because of the medal or the recognition, but because of who you are as a person. You've stayed humble and kind despite everything that's happened to you. Her father reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You know, Sarah, when you first told us you wanted to join the Marines, I was scared for you. I thought the military would be too hard, too dangerous. I never imagined that you would become the one protecting and saving others. Sarah smiled. I learned from you, Dad. You taught me about service and sacrifice long before I ever put on a uniform. You showed me what it means to do your duty even when it's difficult. The next morning, Sarah received a phone call that would lead to her most important assignment yet. She was being asked to return to Afghanistan, not as a regular Marine, but as a special liaison to help improve relationships between American forces and local communities. Your experience with the villagers near your original base was exceptional, her commanding officer explained. You built trust and connections that most Marines struggle to achieve. We want you to help train other Marines in cultural sensitivity and community engagement. Sarah was excited about the opportunity to return to Afghanistan in a new role. She would be able to use her experience not just as a combat Marine, but as someone who understood the importance of building bridges between different cultures and communities. Before deploying again, Sarah made one last stop, the military hospital in Texas where David Chen was completing his rehabilitation. David had made remarkable progress and was now walking with only a slight limp. He was preparing to leave the military and start college in the fall. Sarah, David called out when he saw her approaching down the hospital corridor. He moved toward her with a confidence that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. I heard you're going back to Afghanistan. That's amazing. They sat together in the hospital's garden, catching up on everything that had happened since they last spoke. David told her about his plans to study engineering and his upcoming wedding to his high school girlfriend. Sarah told him about her speaking engagements and her new assignment. You know what the best part is? David said. Kids are reading about what you did and deciding they want to serve their country too. Military recruiters say they've never seen anything like it. You're inspiring a whole new generation of Americans to think about service and sacrifice. Sarah felt the weight of that responsibility, but also the honor of it. I just hope I can live up to what people expect from me. You already have, David assured her. You've shown people that heroism isn't about being perfect or having superpowers. It's about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when the situation demands it. That's a lesson everyone needs to learn. As Sarah prepared for her return deployment, She reflected on how much her life had changed since that terrifying morning when the base came under attack. She had discovered reserves of strength and courage she never knew she possessed. More importantly, she had learned that the most meaningful moments in life often come when we're helping others, when we're putting someone else's needs ahead of our own comfort or safety. The young woman who had once worried about being too small to make a difference in the Marines had become a symbol of what was possible when someone refused to give up. The scared recruit who had wondered if she belonged in the military had become a decorated hero whose story inspired people around the world. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah had learned that real heroism wasn't about the moment when 700 Marines saluted her on that parade ground in Afghanistan. Real heroism was about all the small daily choices to help others, to serve something larger than yourself, and to never leave anyone behind. As her plane lifted off for Afghanistan, Sarah looked down at the American landscape passing below and thought about all the young people she had spoken to over the past months. She hoped that some of them would remember her words when they faced their own moments of testing, their own opportunities to show courage and compassion. Sarah Mitchell had become more than just a Marine who saved a fellow soldier's life. She had become a reminder that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things, and that heroism is not about being the biggest or the strongest, but about being willing to act when action is needed most. The girl from small-town Texas had found her purpose, and that purpose would continue to inspire others long after her own service was complete.